Erev Tov, everyone. Good evening. I hope I didn't lose anybody. Are we still on?
You're good.
I'm good. Okay, I don't see anybody though. I don't see any. Here we are. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, let's see if we can get gallery view. All right, very good. All right, this week, of course, is Parashat Vayeitzei, the Parsha of Yaakov Avinu, having received the bracha reluctantly or, on the other hand, willingly from his father Yitzchak. At the end of last week's Parsha was beckoned by both Yitzchak and Rivka to go to Lavan's house, to Betuel, or to the house of Betuel. He, of course, is dead by this point. And his son Lavan becomes the head of the house. So the Torah tells us, Vayeitzei Yaakov miBe'er Shava. Yaakov went out from Be'er Sheva, Vayelech Harana, and he went toward the city of Haran, as his parents had asked him to do. They were eager to see him Rivka primarily to escape the wrath of Esav. And Yaakov, it appears, at this point realizes Yitzchak at this point realizes that Yaakov is the heir to the spiritual throne of the Jewish people, and they wants him to run away and there to find a wife. Now, the Torah tells us that Yaakov came upon the Makom HaMikdash, the place of the Beit HaMikdash, and the Torah tells us in the Perek Kavchet Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayifga b'makom. He encountered the place. Yaakov Avinu encountered the place. Vayalen sham, and he slept there. Kiva Hashem, because the sun had already set. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom, and he took from among the stones that were there, Vayasem merashotav, and he placed these stones around him. Vayishkav b'makom ahu. Here we begin to get an idea of what Yaakov's life centers upon. Yaakov Avinu's life is such that his whole life finds him alternating between stones and angels and stones. Ordinarily, a stone is quite a mundane, literally, quite a mundane entity. And usually they are not considered to be something which would be of having any spiritual value. We're going to see in Yaakov's life that his alternating from stones to angels and angels to stones has very great religious and spiritual significance. And the Torah tells us in the next pasuk, Vayachalom v'hinei sulam utzav arza, and as he's lying, surrounded, his head surrounded by the stones, he sees a ladder that is stuck, mutzav, that is stuck or planted in the land. The rosho, its feet are in the earth. The rosho magia shamayma, and then now we see for the first time, v'hinei malachei Elohim olim v'yordim bo. And the word hine always means, we use the word behold, of course, but you almost never see the word behold in modern English, except by people's translations of the Torah. But the word v'hinei in the Torah is an exclamation point. When you see hine, it means that there is some degree of attention which is beyond the simple. And so it says here, v'hinei, and take notice, he took notice that Sulam Mutzav Arza, that this ladder was stuck into the ground. V'nei Hashem nitzav alav, and God in this vision is, so to speak, standing. But God has no feet, but we mean standing, and there was this placed an image that represented God. Vayomer ani Hashem Elokei Avraham Avicha, I am the Lord, the God of Avraham, your father, V'Elahei Yitzchak. And then he says, the land that you are on, that you are now currently sleeping on, lying on, I will give to you and to your children. And the next pasuk says, and there you will branch out. You will go in all different directions, your children, your offspring. And then Hashem says, V'hinei anochi imach. Take notice, I am with you. Because right now, Yaakov feels alone. All we have to do is just look at the last parsha. You can imagine none of the people of his family is with him. He's been sent away for his own protection, but still sent away. He is alone. And of course, when a person is isolated and alone, they experience fear. And he said, and Hashem says to him in the dream, Ushmarticha, I will protect you, and I will guard you, and I'm going to bring you to this place, all right? Ki lo ezavcha, I will not abandon you, ad asher im asiti et asher dibarti lach, until the time that I have completed what I said I'm going to do to you. And the final pasuk in this group, Vayikatz Yaakov mishanato. Yaakov awoke from his sleep. Vayomer achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh. Certainly God is in this place. V'anochi lo yadati. Now, and I did not know. It's interesting to point out, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs does in his weekly parsha that on Sefer Bereshit, he makes the following observation. He tells us something that most of us who know Hebrew already know. If I say yadati, that means I knew, or I know. It could mean also I know, but yadati, I knew, or I know. So the question is, you don't really need the pronoun v'anochi lo yadati, and I know. The second reference to I is the focal point of this particular brief discussion, one of his briefest essays, but a very powerful essay. And Rabbi Sachs says that the issue here is, and he quotes, one second. Sorry. He quotes the Hasidic master of Horowitz, who says, Pinchas Horowitz, who wrote the Sefer Panim Yafot, he says, by the word va'anochi lo yadati, what appears to be the superfluous use of the word anochi, when you already have it in the verb form itself, means my ego, my own ego lo yadati. The only reason that there was room for Hashem was because I left no room for the I, for the ego in me. And so therefore, Yaakov Avinu teaches a lesson. That is, if we want God in our life, we have to reduce our ego. So to speak, we have to leave room for God. And this is the point of Va'anochi lo yadati. And my personal I then became subjugated and literally without value. Once that happened, now there is room for God in my life, and now there is room for this Makom Kadosh. And Rabbi Sachs makes the following observation when he talks about prayer, because Yaakov Avinu is now going to utter a prayer, and Chazal tell us that Yaakov Avinu was the originator of the Ma'ariv prayer, the evening prayer. because it says here, Vayala and Sham, and he slept there, he slept there, Kiva Hashemesh, because the sun had set, and when the sun had set, it becomes dark, and that, of course, intensifies his feelings of loneliness and his feelings of isolation. And therefore, he davened and prayed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Avram Avinu is given credit for originating Shachrit. Yitzchak Avinu, in last week's parsha, is credited with the creation of the standardization of a mincha service. And Yaakov now is Ma'ariv. It's interesting to note that Ma'ariv is evening, it's dark, as actually even now it's only about 8:10 or 8:15 at night, and in the summer it would be still time for light. But now, of course, in the winter months, it's dark. And when it's dark, there is this sense of isolation. And Yaakov Avinu, certainly among the three Avot, certainly felt the most isolated. Yitzchak married when he was in Eretz Yisrael. Avram Avinu and Sarah Imenu came when they were in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, it is Yaakov who must find his wife, find his destiny, have his children, all of that in the darkness of Galut in the house of Lavan. And so therefore it's fitting that Yaakov Avinu is associated with Ma'ariv, with the evening prayer. Now, Rabbi Sachs concludes his essay by saying the following: more than prayer changes God, it changes us. It lets us see, feel, and know that God is in this place. How do we reach that awareness? By moving beyond the first person singular, by moving beyond the I, so that for a moment, like Jacob, we can say, I know not the I. In the silence of the I, we meet the thou of God. So that's one of the thoughts that we can have this evening as Yaakov, who has created evening prayer, that we have to understand not just our setting for the evening prayer, but our mindset for all prayer. That at some point we need to be able to reduce the understandable great reach of our own egos and our own eyes, and be able to concentrate on the creator of the universe. At that point, that's when prayer is most effective. Now, I mentioned earlier that Yaakov Avinu, his entire life, focuses on the alternation between angels and stones and angels. And interestingly, right within this very beginning of the parsha, you have that. Torah tells us what would seem to be unnecessarily that he took stones and he placed them around his head, probably for security. Others, Rashi mentions that they were each fighting because in animation, because they wanted the tzaddik's head to lie upon them. That's a hard metaphorical interpretation to understand. I'm not saying, God forbid, that it should be dismissed. I'm only saying that it's hard to understand, and it certainly does not seem to be pshat. Because remember, whenever we want to talk about pshat, we're not talking about literal meanings, and we're not talking about deeper meanings. Pshat is an interpretation of the written word or text, which is as close as possible to the context, to the setting of the parsha. And so, Yaakov Avinu, we see, uses stones in a number of ways. The stone, of course, becomes now in the next few psukim, he creates a matzeva. He creates a matzeva, which we call a monument here. Yaakov was the first of the avot to establish a matzeva. Of course, Abraham did mizbachot. He established altars. Yitzchak did the same, but Yaakov is the first to create the concept of a matzeva, meaning to say a a pillar or a monument. It is upright. Whereas the Mizbeach is probably more flat and flush with the earth's surface. The Matzeva is elevated. Where else does Yaakov use a stone to create the Matzeva? Rachel Imenu passes away. Next week's Parsha. That's the second time, actually the third time that he creates a Matzeva. The second time is at the very end of our Parsha. So I want to point out to you right now, if possible, how this Parsha Vayeitzei actually has bookends to it. Yaakov Avinu runs away, comes to the Har HaBayit, is greeted by angels, admittedly within a dream, but is greeted by angels. And when he is greeted by them and he realizes this is a Makom Kadosh, that this is a sacred place, and the Anochi Lo Yada, I didn't know when I went to sleep, but my own personal ego was receded and that allowed room for God. Then what does he do? He says, if indeed Hashem will return me to this place, to Eretz Yisrael, the land that Hashem promised in the dream to him that would be possessed by him, his heirs, his descendants. So then he says, I'm creating a matzeva. What does he do? He creates his first matzeva, and that matzeva is that if indeed Hashem does what he says he's going to do, and he brings me back b'shalom. Aser asrenu lo. Says Yaakov Avinu here at the beginning of the parsha, I'm going to give 1/10 of my wealth to Hashem. This really creates a problem. Did Yaakov think that God works on commission? That in fact, if he gets the equivalent of $1 million, somehow $100,000 will go to God right off the top. It doesn't seem like such a very religious motivation. Of course, we have a mitzvah. We know that we have a mitzvah of Maaseh, to give 1/10. But the idea, it appears, is that Yaakov is making a deal. I'll make a deal. You keep your end of the bargain, and I will reward you, God, by giving 1/10. It is interesting that the Meforshim, of course, see that this can be a problem. And the answer that is given is as follows. When people get rich, let's start when they're poor. When we're poor, what do we make? We make all kinds of promises, all kinds of nedarim. If this happens, then God, if you just do this for me, I'll give this much money to Yeshiva. If I really win the lottery, so of course, right off the top, the first $1 million is going to go for this worthy cause and that worthy cause. And of course, by the way, we probably mean it. Yaakov Avinu is making a different type of claim. He says, even if I become rich, so rich that I am at the stage where human beings say, look what I did. I did this, I made this investment, I did this hard work, I made this right decision and this right judgment, and they forget about the obligations of realizing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us everything. So Yaakov's not saying is if you make me rich. He's saying even if you make me rich, when sometimes we are inclined to forget our beginnings and forget who gave us the wealth that we possess, the material wealth. Yaakov Avinu said, I'm not going to forget. Why? Because this matzeva is going to remind me of this night. Yaakov Avinu is the first of the Avot who uses the matzeva to establish something that we will call memory. Now, I've mentioned in the past that two great gifts that God has given human beings is the ability to summon up things of the past that are no longer here, and to then also imagine things in the future. Summoning things in the past is memory. Vision is when we actually can see something the way it is now and envision it and see it as it is not now, doesn't exist now. But in my mind, I can create that. Every great artist, every great creative person sees things as they are, ideally, then they look to see things as they should be. Yaakov Avinu established the Matzeva to force us to look, never to forget the past. First Matzeva is he said, Hashem, I'm putting the Matzeva here. When I come back, I will know. The second Matzeva comes literally after Yaakov runs away to Lavan's house. The next few parshiot, in this parsha, the next couple of prakim deal with the fact that, of course, he comes to Lavan's house, or at least he comes to the area of Nahor, and of course, you have the shepherds who are there. And once again, we find a stone which is huge. No one person, no one group is capable of moving it, at least in normal times, and it's there so as to protect the water supply for various different groups. There's the Evan. Torah goes out of the way. Tell us again, stone. And Yaakov Avinu, out of this great inspiration and sense of love that he actually felt when he saw Rachel Imenu, so he lifted the stone from the be'er. So then we know that, of course, he worked 7 years for Rachel Imenu, and then he was given Leah, and he continued to stay. He was in Lavan's house for 20 years. They're all in this parsha, and the children are born: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. All of the children are born, with the except Yosef is born there, and the children of Bilhah and Zilpah are born there, with the exception of Binyamin, whose birth will be recorded in next week's parsha. Now he realizes, and he's always realized, that Lavan himself was constantly involved in fraudulent business practices. Lying was his modus operandi. So Yaakov realizes and says, I'm going to leave. And he creates a situation with the flock, and he and Rachel and Leah, who apparently realize also the unscrupulous nature of their father, agree to leave. So, in fact, in the dead of night, they leave. Lavan is told that they all are gone, and he chases them. Now, of course, it's hard. He, with his men, he relatively easily overtook Yaakov with his children and with his wives and their needs. And they meet, the Torah tells us, once again, toward the end of this parsha. They meet and they have a somewhat contentious interaction. And Lavan says, why did you leave in the middle of the night? Why did you steal the trafim, these little angels, these little gods with a small g? Why did you do that? He didn't know that it was Rachel who took them. But Lavan said to Yaakov, they create again, and stones take the centerpiece again. Yaakov Avinu says to the boys, we don't know exactly who they are. They could be Lavan's men. They could be people associated with his group. And he said, go gather stones. But then after that, and they decide they're going to make a pact between each other. Vayomer Lavan leYaakov, Hinei agala, look at this pile of rocks which we've put up. The Hinei amatzeva, and look at this pillar which you have done and placed between you and me. And he said, they shall be testimony as to what occurred here, and that whenever we see it, the memory will be created of these two, the pile of stones and the monument that was set up by Yaakov Avinu. And they part ways, and the parsha concludes by telling us the last five psukim in the parsha, 4 or 5. I'm sorry, the last 3 in the parsha is in Perek Lamed Bet, Pasuk Aleph. Vayashkem Lavan baboker. Lavan got up. Vayinashek levanav livnatav. in accord with the peace agreement that the two of them had made, established through the pile of stones and the matzeva, this monument that Yaakov had set up. He kissed them, blessed them. Vayelech vayashav Lavan limkomo. Now, the Torah uses a very interesting phrase here, Vayashav Lavan limkomo. This word, we find this in at least 3 places in the Torah. Vayashav, it says, Avraham shav limkomo. The Torah tells us that after Avram Avinu made his plea not to destroy all of Sodom, then he said 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. And then Avram Avinu realized that his pleas were listened to, but that he was really, his pleas were for the wrong people. So he then says, it says, Vayashav Avraham limkomo. Avraham Avinu returned to his place. What does that mean? It means that Avraham Avinu had the desire so great to save humanity or parts of humanity that he was in fact the advocate for humanity. He did everything he could. He pleaded the case with the judge of the world, Hashofet Kol Haaretz, the judge of all the earth. And then after he made his plea, and God said, fine, I'll go down to 10. And of course, God knew that there weren't even 10 in Sodom. It says, Vayashav Avram limkomo. Avram went back to being to his place. What does it mean? It doesn't mean he went back necessarily only to Beersheba or Hebron or wherever he was at the time, but it was his place. He realized and understood his place. Not that he was wrong, but he rose to the heights. He became the advocate. He actually argued with the creator of the world and with the judge of the earth. Then he realized it's time to go back to being a human being. He pled his case. Now it's up to God to determine. So we see here, again, Lavan shav, it says, Vayashav Lavan limkomo. Lavan was actually, for the 20 years that Yaakov Avinu was in Lavan's house, Lavan's stature was elevated. And in some ways, he probably was even to some degree affected spiritually by Yaakov Avinu's, just by his presence. Now they part. Lavan goes back to where he was, not just his physical location, but his spiritual location. He went back to being the same Lavan that he was 20 years before, when Yaakov Avinu first came on the scene. Now, if we look carefully, we see the very last pasuk of this parsha. This is what makes it bookends. Remember, when Yaakov Avinu left, ran away, vayifga b'makom. The verb there is, he encountered the place, meaning that's the place where he would both sleep and institute the prayer of the evening. Vayakov halach darko, vayifgeu vo malachei Elohim. Now, it is not just HaKadosh Baruch Hu alone, that angels, the very beings, I don't know whether the same angels, they're the very beings that sent him off on this 20-year journey that he encountered before. Once again, he sees these malachim, and Rashi tells us, of course, the malachim that he sees here are the malachim of Eretz Yisrael. There's malachei chutz la'aretz, malachei Eretz Yisrael, and Yaakov Avinu sees them. So this is a reenactment, so to speak, of what happened 20 years before. Yaakov goes to Beit El. There he sees angels going up and down the ladder. He has stones. And here, Yaakov now, Yomer Yaakov sees the angels again here. Kasher Ra'am, and he saw them, and he said, Machanei Elohim. This is God's camp. Vayikra Shem HaMakom Ahu Machanayim. And so we now come to the end of this parsha which in itself begins and ends with angels and stones. Angels and stones of the ladder, and of course, just prior to Yaakov's going to sleep, beginning, angels and stones, the stones that Lavan and Yaakov used to create this pact between them, and of course the angels that now escort Yaakov Avinu back into Eretz Israel. We'll see that this theme, angels and stones, carries itself through more than once in the next parsha as well. So I want to wish everybody a good evening, and I hope you have a nice Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and Yetzer Hashem, we'll see you next time.
Have a good Shabbos. Thank you.
Good Shabbos.
Everybody, good
Yen
Shabbos.
Shakar. Thank you, Rabbi.
Very good.